Today, I am very pleased to welcome our guest, Mercedes Bowyer. Apologies there. I have known Mercedes superficially for the past few years because of her work as the director of the Oliver Art Center. She is now the donor engagement director for the Grand Traverse Regional Community Foundation. But I invited Mercedes here today because over the past few years, I keep noticing these wonderful little fibrous pieces showing up in our shows, and they're created by the one and only Mercedes. So I was really intrigued by her work there. And as we get into thinking about her particular body of work and her history with making, I want you to think for a second about the show that we have on display here. So this show was juried by Nicole Webb, who is with Grand Valley State University. One of the things that I really enjoyed about what she brought to this exhibition was a real appreciation for texture, material color, but also craft, and this space that exists in a hybrid space between what we might think of as a fine art context and what we might think of as a traditional craft-based kind of context and environment. And it makes me, I'm gonna go for a second here and talk about a personal memory of mine. I remember being in art school in undergrad, and I was talking to a grad student who was assisting with a class. And I said something which now strikes me as so, I guess, foolish, but at the time I was probably 18, 19 years old. And I said, I want to make work that you can't tell whether a woman made it or a man made it. And as I look back and think about that statement now, I realize, right, that was because I had this need to be seen as serious, and I was operating in context where it was only serious if it didn't look like women's work. And the grad student at that time said, "Oh, well, it doesn't matter to me. I mean, why shouldn't it be made by a woman?" You know, and so that was an important moment for me in my study. And when we look through the show, you can see a lot of processes, a lot of materials that are traditionally associated with women's work, with craft work, which is maybe not recognized as important, as impactful, as serious, and as meaningful as it is. And so I think Mercedes' work really exists in that sphere. And I'm really grateful that you're here today to tell us about your own experience with your creative practice and tell us a little bit more about needlepoint, which is something that I don't know that much about. So please join me in welcoming Mercedes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Thank you, everybody, for coming out in a snowstorm. Although I have to say, I probably had the longest drive, so I don't really feel too sorry. It took me 3 hours to get here. But I'm really pleased to be here, and I want to thank Crooked Tree and the crew for not only hanging a beautiful show, but inviting me to come. Organizations like Crooked Tree, as you guys know, play a vital role in the development of artists and the creation of artistic communities. So we're always forever grateful for our community art centers. So my plan today is to talk a little bit about myself. I'm an introvert, so it'll be a little bit about myself. A lot about my journey, while also shining a light on a medium that, while it's been around for centuries, has just recently really started to make a comeback. I'll share some examples of my work, where my inspiration and motivation came from, tips, techniques, some of my favorite tools to use. And if you have any questions at any time, comments, just raise your hand or shout them out. We'll just keep this informal. It's just kind of a little talk between us. So, sorry, just a little bit about myself. Does this take a minute? Cool. All right. So I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, but I was raised in Michigan. I have a Master's of Arts and Museum Studies from the University of Oklahoma, and I've worked in the museum nonprofit field for over 25 years. I returned to Michigan and settled in Frankfort in 2012, where I currently live with my husband and my niece. I joined the Community Foundation after 10 years as executive director of Oliver Art Center. And being an artist. At that time, I did not consider myself You know, I used to tell people about different things and jewelry making and sewing. I tried quilting, made one, hated it. So, you know, I dabbled in a lot of different things, but it was really there that I kind of honed down a little bit to figure out my work. So this is my mentor and my inspiration. This is my grandmother. But she was the person that taught me to needlepoint. I believe I was probably 8 or 9 the first time she taught me. She was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and graduated from Washington University with a degree in fashion design. And she worked in Chicago, where she lived with her husband, Dwight Black, an architect. I spent my summers with them, so that's the time when she taught me knitting and needlepoint. She was very creative. She was proficient in watercolor, which you can see by her dress designs, and sketching in addition to the needlepoint and sewing. She made me my own paper doll in my own image, and then made a blank that I was to design the clothes on. And then she actually sewed my Barbie a beautiful wedding dress. And then she would needlepoint accessories for my dollhouse. So I have this tiny Persian rug about this big that she needlepointed, and then a couple of custom chair covers for my dollhouse. So like I said, very creative. And she's the reason why I got back into needlepointing. So too far. A little bit about needlepointing. In its most basic form, has been in existence since the Egyptians adorned muslin. During the 17th and 18th century, it was used as a tool for young women to demonstrate their proficiency in creating a home and thus snagging a husband. But for this talk, we'll talk about the form that's been popularized since the 1950s and 60s. There has been a recent resurgence in the more traditional craft forms that is being fueled by both the millennial generation and the pandemic. You see young women and men, if you guys recognize Burt Reynolds, that of all ages, stitching ornaments, purse inserts, holiday decor. The current process of needlepoint is carefully curated from start to finish. It starts by going into a needlepoint store, picking out your painted canvas, whether it's hand painted or machine painted, selecting your threads and fibers, finding the stitch guide, and getting to work. Then you finish by sending it to a professional finisher or framer or completing it yourself. And it has become a multi-million-dollar industry. So at the start of 2020, so this is actually before COVID. And when I say I started in 2020, everybody thinks it was the pandemic that triggered it, and it wasn't. I tried to quit smoking. So I used puzzles. And when I did all the puzzles in the house, I went, there's gotta be something sustainable I can use to keep my hands busy. And my grandmother had made the bag out, and I pulled out this little project, which is similar to this piece here in the corner, and just retaught myself stitching, retaught myself how to prep canvases, and, you know, tried some fancier stitches that I had never gotten into before. And around the same time, the art center I worked for had a fundraiser. And that was where we would hang 200 canvases that were 6 by 6 in one big collage, and then we would sell them off bit by bit. And it's COVID, so we all sat at home. My husband's an artist, my daughter's an artist, and we just started cranking out these canvases. So I could work on little 6 by 6 pieces, and I did different patterns. These are all my 6 by 6 pieces, just to practice. And then at the same time, I could raise money for my art center. So it worked out nicely. Additionally, we launched something called Little Free Art Galleries, a lot like Little Free Libraries, but we made them little art galleries. And we did a call out to local businesses to host a gallery, and we had 3 respond. So we ended up with 3 galleries. And since it was my baby, I really made sure we made a bunch of stock to put into those. So those are the 4 by 4 canvases that you see here at the bottom. So again, just a lot of practice and repetition with patterns and colors and the different stitches. So then once that fundraiser was over, I was kind of trying to figure out what my next move is going to be. And I have a friend who works at another art center who's always making comments, you know, like pushing yourself a little bit, like see what you can do, what you can make out of things and how you can develop. And so I was really kind of searching for how can I put my signature onto this medium. And I had a pillow kit that my grandmother had never gotten to, but my husband ordered me the painted canvas, the floral that's up in the left-hand corner. And it came with fibers and told me where to put certain colors and certain stitches. And about halfway through, I decided that I wasn't going to use white. I was going to use a sparkle white. And I thought, oh, Lordy, I'm just totally out of the box with this one. And then by the time I was done, I kind of sat it down and went, yeah, it was fine. I just wasn't super stimulated and I didn't like being told what color to use, what stitch to use, where to put it. So I really tried searching around to see how I could figure out how to do original designs, which led me to one day, my daughter, she was probably about 11 or 12 and we were letting her roam around Frankfort on her own with friends. And so I wanted to track her phone like any mother would do. And when I pulled up her phone, her location, it popped up with this aerial map. And I thought, oh, that'd be really kind of cool to try and recreate in fiber. So I was able to do that. It's not the best picture, but I did use sparkly threads again. I really liked those when I started for some reason. And then I moved to, that's my interpretation of M22 in Benzie County as an aerial view as well. And so I think looking back, this is probably where that shift occurred, that I decided to go a little bit rogue with what I was doing. So going down that path, I wanted to create my own designs, but I can't draw. I don't really have the talent for that. And my husband used to do line drawings, kind of doodles is what he called them. So I asked him to make me a doodle and I'd stitch it, which is this upper left hand bit of a train wreck, but I think it's a train wreck looking back on it. And so that's when I realized just how hard circles and curves were to do for beginners. So then I said, okay, can you make me another one, but only squares and rectangles? So, I mean, I thought it was cheating. So then I thought, okay, well, I'll do some really fancy stitches in this one to kind of get a little bit more practice. And so that's how that one turned out. And then the next one, I was kind of mindlessly scrolling Facebook like everyone does. And I saw this really cool picture of Sleeping Bear. And I thought, you know, that's a pretty simple composition. I bet I could transform that into a fiber piece. And, you know, so I tried to pick out stitches that looked really, really close to the actual thing. So I was scouring books and online, like literal Google searches for autumn leaves and needlepoint. I mean, just because I didn't know what was out there. And so that's how that piece ended up. But
I walked in at the very brief moment.
Yeah.
I own that.
I know, I was just gonna say. You do, yes. Thank you, Darcy. And so the one, I guess, hiccup I had in that process was trying to figure out how to get the image from printing it off on my printer at home onto the canvas. And so luckily I have a storm door that faces west. So I taped the picture on my storm door and I put the canvas over the top of it and then just traced. So that is how I ended up getting that image there. Which leads me to one of the biggest questions I get is, where do I get all of my images? So the Sleeping Bear image is the only outlier. I could not find the original photographer, could not find any credits at all whatsoever. Working as an arts administrator, you know how important it is to protect one's art from duplication or copying. And I really felt horrible that I had taken this person's photograph and made it into my own art. So from there on out, I decided to only use my husband's or my photography or people that I would have permission from. So this image, the two outside images are photos that I took This one's from the window at Point Betsy inside the tower. My husband took the middle image and then doctored it a little bit to make the shadows a little bit darker, and that's what I tried to focus on in the creation. And then the other two were just different perspectives. My husband's been a photographer for many years. And I think he got tired of me asking, like, well, do you have any more pictures I could do? And he finally was like, why don't you take your own? And then you can make your own creations. And so, so he really inspired me to kind of get out there and look at things differently. And I found, like, driving down the road or when we'd go visit new places, that I would be really interested in looking at things going, could I put that into fiber? How could I make that work? And so my phone storage is very full now, thanks to him. Okay, so then this is the piece that's on display in this show, and it is the Grand Hotel. A friend had suggested that I start working a little bit bigger. I was very much 5x7, no bigger than 8x10, mostly because I was too cheap to buy bigger stretcher bars. And I didn't like using the stand because my mom joked and said I looked like some Edwardian lady. And so I just preferred to work smaller. And so somebody said, you should try something larger, really push your boundaries a bit. And Mark had this photo from when we were visiting the island from the ferry. So it's not a super clear photo, but I thought, I can make that work. And so, you know, as with probably a lot of people, I have always admired the hotel. I've never actually stayed there. I mistakenly got dropped off by one of the cabs and they thought I was a guest and they welcomed us into the lobby. And we were just like, I don't think we're supposed to be here. So we looked at the shops and left, but you know, it was a fun day. So I thought this would be a great attempt on here. So I did have to buy larger stretcher bars and I did break out the stand, as you can see here. By this time I had upgraded to a light box, so I didn't have to tape it to my front door. And you'll see some of my favorite tools up in the corner here are dental tools, so that I could like move some of the fibers to get the needle down underneath. And because in some of the finer detail, it's really difficult to make sure you're, you know, getting it in the hole, for lack of a better term. And then one of the other interesting things was I was searching for other photos of the hotel just to compare with the one he took, because it was a little bit grainy and every image I found had a different number of dormer windows. So I had to go back and research that initially there was only like dormers on the left side, and then they had them all across, and then they took them out, and it was just this whole big kind of a nightmare trying to figure out what stage of the hotel's life I guess I was doing. I did not expect that to happen. So I think I took a little bit of artistic license, so don't count the windows, and they're probably off a little bit. But the other thing was during this time I had underwent surgery. So I had plenty of time. It was on my foot. So I had plenty of time on my butt to do those French knots. I wish I would have counted. I know there's thousands. And I don't think I did French knots for about 6 months after I finished this piece. But I finished this piece the day it was due at an exhibition. So nothing like right at the perfect time. Since then, it's been all over Michigan. It won a prize at the Muskegon Museum of Art, and even traveled to Virginia, where it was won a prize in the largest judge show of needle arts in the country. Yeah.
So you call the texture thing a French knot.
Mhm.
So have you incorporated those in earlier works?
I had, and I think I've got an image of it a little bit later, but I failed miserably at it. I couldn't, for whatever reason, I couldn't figure out how to finish off the knot so that it was nice and tight close to the canvas. And you'll look, the piece right behind me has probably double the number of French knots. So that was really impressive when I came and saw the show. So by this point, because I had tried a couple of different stitches and I kept having to frog it, which means you rip it out. So rip, frog. So I frogged at least the whole bottom part of it. And so I really just kind of had to buckle down and figure out what I was doing wrong.
I just want to say, I take students through here, kids of all ages, through the galleries. Your piece is one it is one that they go to and want to know more about. They recognize it, obviously,
Mhm.
because they're kids that live up in this area, but they're very interested in how it's made. So that was one question, one just comment I wanted to make, but I also wondering, do you have any idea how many hours you have in the piece left?
Most of the pieces, and I'm kind of looking over at the table too, will take me 6 to 8 weeks. I think this one was closer to 3 months by the time it was all done. No, I use all 6-strand DMC embroidery thread. Plain Jane, you can get it at any craft store. But the thread that I used here is variegated. So it does change shades of green throughout the thread itself.
One more question. So thinking about your very intentional use of your own photographs or how you want to capture that imagery, and you're working from this, this photo up top that has total information missing, right? So you have to fill in the blanks. I think that turned into something very beautiful with the choices you had to make with the texture and the color. Can you talk about that, like decision making?
Yeah, that, I try not to take too much artistic license. Most of my subjects I think are beautiful as they are. You'll see a picture later on. There's a lighthouse that has since been renovated, but when I wanted to stitch it, I wanted to stitch it before the renovations. So I did the rust and the collapsing roof. And so I try not to take too much artistic license, but in the case of this, the sky, I went with a very just plain color. I tend to have a lot of fun with my skies, but in here, I didn't want that to detract from the focal point of the hotel. And then I mean, honestly, with the trees, I totally cheated. That's variegated thread. And I just, I would do almost a skein at a time. And it would just I would place it in certain spots, but other than that, that just happened naturally because of the thread.
I think that's smart. It's cheap.
Yeah, I wanted to comment like that. You're talking about how you feel like you're an artist and you can't draw. You're making a lot of really big design choices that are very successful.
Thank you. That's nice to hear. Yeah. Any other questions before I move off this piece? Which it's over here on the wall if you haven't seen it in person. And I will tell you a little secret. The frame is hinged. You can open it. So I'll let you didn't know that? I can just open it. That is the problem with my work is you just want to touch it. So I'm usually pretty good about it. So this one I kind of did tongue in cheek. I don't consider myself like an activist or really blatant, but as I was working to forge my own path, I found myself working really hard for validation. And I think that came from, again, another friend of mine at an art center said, I think people assume you're just stitching painted canvases that you bought. And it had never occurred to me that people would think that. Therefore, I might not have been entered into shows because it didn't qualify. So I really kind of played around with what adjectives I was using to describe my art, whether it was fiber art or thread painting, which I didn't care for that one, or original needlepoint. And so, that was one of the biggest hurdles that I encountered right off the bat. And then one of the other ones was kind of like what Liz alluded to is a lot of times, the hobby art is not oftentimes considered fine art. Which is a conversation I had often in my previous world as director of an art center. I would have board members look at me and go, well, we don't consider that fine art. And it would be this clear line of watercolors and oils versus crocheted pieces and woven rug panels. And so that there was often this like push and pull on what is considered fine art and what is not. And I used to joke with my board that if I could change the name of the art center to the Center for Creativity, I would have, because I thought that that told a better story of what we were trying to encourage. There was also a small part of me that always wondered whether or not I was let into shows because I ran an art center. So I really liked to do the outside of the state show and just kind of, you know, places that didn't know who I was, frankly. But that's one of the things is you just kind of have to put yourself out there and exhibit as much as you can, sell as much as you can. I even donated work up here to the Panther Parents, which is, to be fair, my child's school. So I guess that was a good thing. But, you know, just trying to get your name out there and talking about your art, being able to say to somebody like, no, this isn't a painted canvas. I got it at my local needlepoint shop. And so you spend a lot of time entering shows and getting rejected and getting accepted and just kind of honing in, you know, on what you're trying to do. I created an Instagram account, which I am not super active on because it's confused me. And so, and then I just recently, with my, you know, here's my work in progress. Here's halfway through. Here's almost done. Here's done. Here's on display. Yeah.
Would that be Lady Travis video?
Traverse City, yeah.
So I don't remember seeing it. I tried to get down.
It's this little one on the edge of the table
Okay.
of the blockhouse on Mackinac Island. Yeah, you like how I stuck that in. But that's Ludington, Oliver, Glen Arbor, and Muskegon, I think, all right there. So one of the things I started doing is I tried to find groups and organizations that kind of could give me validation that would force people to take me seriously. So I found the Embroiderers Guild of America, and that was really, really broad. I joined, you know, paid my dues for about a year and was like, yeah, okay, it's all right. Well, that's fine. The Fiber Art Network, which is huge and very easy to get lost in as an artist. And then the American Needlepoint Guild, which is the apes, half of which I ended up leaving because Facebook groups can be weird. And so what the nice thing is, though, there are a few, as there's competition, there's constant support and critique in a nice way and asking for help and ideas. And so that's been a really awesome growth point for me there. So pointer, but the master needle artist seemed to fit what I was doing better. It was a little bit looser. And so I decided what is this tail? You know, I already work full time, raise kids, like what is gonna do? And the first step is application. And you're probably thinking that seems super simple. Choose color and execute excellent stitching. They even wanted photographs of the back. And if anybody of you know about the back of needlepoint, that's like where you hide all the bodies. But they wanted like no twisted threads, no knots, like it had to be And my piece, I think I put it over there somewhere. So then you had that, and then you had to do a one-page summary explaining your sampler. And then you had to write a paragraph on why you wanted to pursue this. And that was only part one. Part two was an open book test that asks questions about color theory, organizing principles of design, elements of design, stitch families, definitions. And then you had to submit an original abstract design, no bigger than a sheet of paper, to show good design and color scheme. And in the end, the application ended up being 11 pages. So once you've passed this, you're accepted into the program that takes 2 years to finish. And I just thought, what did I do? So I forged ahead because they had already cashed my check. So the year one is you're supposed to pick a topic and write a thesis that has something to do with needlework, the art, history. So mine was an introduction to the role of needlepoint samplers in early American female education. So my little quip earlier about samplers being a way for women to demonstrate that they were ready to get married and run a household is very true, based in fact. And so once your research topic is approved, then you have to research it, and they have certain requirements for sources, a works cited page. I think my thesis ended up being 22 pages with images, which made it longer. So then that got accepted, and they were like, you're ready for year two. And year two is to create your own original work based off of your thesis. So then I'm like, crap, now I have to do a sampler. So what am I going to do a sampler on? And you know, they're typically used also to tell stories, to give information about something. So I chose the Great Lakes, living in Michigan. And I decided to take the formation of the lakes and make it abstracted into squares and rectangles because it's easier. And I was choosing my battles. And then I kept going back on, do we want to talk about, there's really not a way to talk about the history of a lake. So I went with water depths and tried to translate that into, again, very squared and rectangled shapes, but using different color hues to denote the different depths. My original design called for also using the Native American name for the lake, which in my final piece did not fit. So I was not able to add that part. But then I used the lines in between all the lakes to denote the land masses between them. And then each area where the name is denoted sandy shores with rocks. And so there were a few things that I kind of built into this final sampler, which was the largest piece I had ever done. They required a stitch sampler on what stitches I would be using. And I'm trying to picture this a year out, like, well, what the heck stitch I'm going to be using. So I just had to kind of go through and pick out water looking stitches or stitches that had movement to them. And then I settled on kind of the stitches with the most movement are at the shallowest, so that it kind of mimics waves and the shorelines. And so all of that had to get approved before you were able to start it. And then once you finish it, you send it back to your chairperson, and they usually take some time to deliberate to let you know whether or not you've passed the certification. And then the very final thing you have to do is present all of this at conference, which they do once a year. I heard from my chairperson last week that she'll have my decision by the end of this week. So we still don't know, but fingers crossed that I didn't waste 2 years. But so the final piece is actually over on the table, which you can take a look at.
Actually, if you don't get the approval, do you submit a final project again, or do you start yet?
I don't know. I didn't ask. I was a little afraid of the answer. I don't think I really wanted to know that. So, I mean, fingers crossed. I think this year's conference is in Kansas City. I think they said I could mail it. I don't know if I have to go to Kansas City. So that's kind of up in the air, but, so yeah, fingers crossed. So this is my current work in progress. Anybody from my region will recognize this is the Grand Traverse Commons, which is the former, mental asylum in Traverse City. It's actually where my office is located. So, we went on a campus-wide tour as one of our first like staff affinity trips, and we got to tour the whole place and into the tunnels and got all the ghost stories and everything. So that's when I took the picture. And so I've started it, I did the outline, and I did include it on my stand here, so you could kind of see a work in progress. The most challenging part so far has been the roof line, and trying to get the different shades so that you can differentiate the corners, and so it just doesn't look like a one-dimensional jagged line. And then the other portion was, I typically use all 6 strands. I try not to thin out unless I'm doing details. And because the details on this are so small, I'm having to thin out all of my lines by using only 2 or 3 strands of the thread. Except for the sky. I did use full 6 strands on that one. I started with what I thought were the easiest parts because in my mind, I'm really timid to do the bricks. One thing that I have found is DMC has thousands of shades, and I brought their book. You can see just how many shades they have, but it never fails at least one project. They don't have a shade that I want. So I do a lot of mixing, and that helps come up with some of the texture, some of the depth in a few of the other pieces, which also just causes a huge mess in my living room when I'm trying to shred apart all of these and then keep them straight. And am I using 2 or 1 or so? I'm working on a side piece, just trying to figure out how I'm going to get the brick mimicked on this piece. And again, I opted to not do too strong of a sky, so I did use 1 shade. I had gotten to where I was using, and I can show you, I think on the next one. I would use gradient, like those 2 up here on the left, that, you know, in real life, if you're looking at a horizon, it gets lighter as you get closer to the horizon. And so I was trying to mimic that a little bit more. But in the state hospital piece, just because I didn't want it to detract from the building itself, I kept it very 1 shade and not a super loud, in my mind, stitch. So these are several of my projects since 2020. The garden theater piece was the piece I did French knots. And I think they weren't working because I was also trying to put a bead on there to make it look like the bulbs underneath the marquee. So that was where I failed at my French knots, but it's sold, so I don't have to look at it, so it's all good. It's all good. And you can see for the most part, this is all Michigan locations. The house in the top center was actually the house my mom grew up in. I did that for her for Mother's Day. And then the house in the bottom right, I did for a friend's mom. That is her house on Clearwater Beach. And so this is the one that I talked about. It has been beautifully renovated. It's the Charity Island Lighthouse, which sits on Charity Island just off the coast of Lake Huron, where we have a cottage. And so you can see the tower from our shoreline. And I thought it would be really neat to try and recreate it when it was ugly and not restored. And then the one next to it, I think, is Spectacle Reef. And there I really had to play with the reflection in the water of the tower. That was a request from my aunt. And then, I mean, pier stocking, this was a really early piece of mine that I actually took probably in November before snow. But it was such an ugly picture. I was like, let's make it fall and just put up a bunch. And again, this is variegated thread. So I'm telling you, it is the best. And then obviously Leland, you know, I played with the water a little bit there as well. And then the bridge at night I did add beads to that one too, to denote the lights and then the reflection of the towers in the water. And then the Grand Hotel again, I was on just this Mackinac Island kick for a while. And the blockhouse outside of Muskegon, which is where I grew up. And then another Point Betsy and the fort at Fort Michalowski, I think is that upper one. And you'll see, I don't often do abstract pieces. I do a lot of landscapes. But the driftwood was found on our beach. And I just wanted kind of a mindless project that I didn't have to constantly refer to photos and get out my sand and my dental tools and everything. So that one was just kind of an experimental piece. And then on the table, I have a few of my finished pieces. I brought several of my favorite tools. You'll see things over there that probably shouldn't normally be used for needlepoint. My dental tools, which are probably my favorite. I have a hair straightener that I actually do use on the thread. You'll see on the St. Anne's Church, to get the siding, I needed to have it really, really flat. So I did actually flatten the floss there. And then just my blocking board. So once my pieces, you just put it on the mat, spray it with some water and stretch it so that you get it, for the most part, center. I think if you look really close, they're not always perfectly square, but that's the nature of fibers. And then I brought a light board just so you could see what one of those would be. And then I keep a stitch journal. With my membership through A&G, you get this really beautifully done catalog that I constantly cut up if I see stitches I like, or different techniques that I like, and then I'll paste them into a journal that I can look back on. And then all of my notes from the master course is over there as well. But I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Yes.
I'm curious how you came to these dental tools. Is that something you found from another artist, or is that your own discovery?
Well, I don't even remember, because I have a friend who's a dentist, and when I posted that online, she was like, why didn't you tell me? I would have just given you some. But I made the comment to my husband that I'm like, I need to move this to get in here. And he's like, it would be great if you had like those picks like the dentists use, and Amazon has everything. So that I joke and say that's my gift from Jeff Bezos, that I use to really get the details in there. And if anybody in here needle points, I use masking tape around the edges of my canvas. I don't get super creative and buy the printed tape that you can buy at the local needlepoint stores. Masking tape works just fine. Yeah.
So all of these art works that started as craft years ago, they were handed down. My grandmother taught me to sew, so that's where I picked that up. But I remember my grandmother, my great aunt, they did a lot of needlepoint. It was all the you buy a little pack, I have a friend that does that as well. Are you passing this along to your daughter in any way, or anyone else?
She has no interest. She sketches. She sketches. That's where she prefers to be, just pencil sketching. And she's a musician, and she's in theater. So she has her creative outlets in other ways, but yeah, sitting down and repeatedly stabbing something doesn't interest her very much. Yeah.
So, do you always take a photo of what you're going to be? Is it always like your photo, or do you try to, do you put a lot of weight into the photo that you take, or try to capture something in photo to then be able to transfer it to your art? I know you talked about peer stocking, where it was like kind of just
it was like from the car, and yeah, it wasn't perfectly lined up. It depends. So I have a few of the hospital that I'm working on now. I have a few side images that I took because I knew I'd want to zoom in and see the windows better. If I'm planning it out, I will take several different images, but most of them are off the cuff, hanging out the window of a car. Yeah, not too much. And like in the block house, I think there was a trash can and a car parked next to it, and I just didn't stitch those. So, but for the most part, yeah, it's just kind of off the hook, quick photo. And the one of my mom's house when she grew up actually came out of a magazine, because her dad designed the house and it was in an architectural magazine. So I did that from a black and white photo, and it was a surprise for my mom. So I had to text my aunt. I'm like, what color was that car in the driveway? And she was like, blue. I'm like, sure, because I didn't know what it was. So yeah, I'm like, I could make that work. So yeah. Yes.
So do you do any layering? Or like the flowers by the Grand Hotel,
Mhm.
where you have the. More simple, but
Mhm.
you have the white on the left there,
Mhm.
gray or the. Do you layer the flowers on top of that, or is everything their own thing?
Some,
Okay.
but mostly everything is its own thing. I use a lot of guidelines, so. Like for the lighthouse at the very top, when I'm working on the sky, I'll put in the two sidelines that go up on the tower, but I'll do it in like hot pink or neon green, just to get the sky to fill in, and then I'll snip those white threads and put in what I'm really gonna use. Just because if you build up too much on the canvas, then it just kind of looks wonky. It starts to warp the back of it. So it is butting up right against each other quite a bit, but those flowers, yeah, they did overlap a little.
I was kind of wondering, same thing for the rope on the boat.
That is laid right on top, yeah, and I think I had one stitch to anchor it, but I did want it to look more 3D,
Does pop a lot.
yeah. I actually posted that in one of those semi-sketchy online groups. And I posted the original picture and then my finished piece, and I had this woman just completely lose her mind that I had made the rope yellow. It should be white. And I showed her the picture again and was like, well, in the picture, it's yellow. And then I left the group. I was like, this isn't constructive at all. So
Unnecessary comment.
I don't mind criticism, but so,
It looks like you stayed pretty much on an 18 count.
mhm.
So
The
did you
smaller
cut
the
that
better,
down
I
to-
prefer, yeah.
Yeah.
I
Did you ever
have-
go down to a 24 or?
I have not been able to find 24. So, I prefer the smaller. I have, when I first started, I didn't really know, so I would order off of Etsy or Amazon. And I think I've got some 12 at home that I look at and I'm like, my God, it's like, it's huge, and it's still sitting
24.
there.
Next time I come up, I'll sneak it.
Yeah,
Sneak it.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the smaller the better, which was one of the things I learned, that my vision is not what it used to be. So I do have readers. So, to go off of what my mom had made a joke about the Edwardian lady with her stand and my readers, and yeah, that's why I don't normally do demos, because I look a little ridiculous when I'm doing it. But yeah.
I'm kind of fascinated by the style of the one with the bridge. Not to draw a comparison, because each artist is an artist in
Mhm.
their own right, but I'm fascinated how in needlepoint, you kind of pull in almost a Van Gogh. And it's different from anything else you've done.
Because-
Start with the sun is beautiful.
Part of that is because it's a nighttime. That's my only nighttime
It's gorgeous.
one that I've done. Yeah, I had to get the water on the bridge is the same water on the Leland photo. And the stitch just lends itself really nicely to blending colors, because you go into the old stitch to make the new one. So it naturally blends. So it's really nice to be able to do water using that stitch.
I love
I'm sure it has a name. I don't know the names of stitches. And half the time I'll look up how to do them and be like, nah, I don't really like that. I'll just add another space. I count the holes as I'm going across. I'll add a hole or two and change the diagonal. And so that's part of the reason why I nicknamed it Rogue Needlepoint, because I felt like I was going a little bit rogue. And I've had people ask me to teach before, but because I'm left-handed, I also stitch very differently. So when you do the typical basket weave, you're supposed to go right to left and then turn the canvas, and I don't, I just go backwards. And so every time somebody's like, will you teach me? I'm like, I don't think you want me to teach you. Completely backwards, and I kind of just do what I want.
You make it fun.
Well, and that's it, as I enjoy it. I traded one addiction for another. And usually there's not a day that goes by that I don't stitch, so I stitch daily. Usually right after I finish a project, I might go a day or two without while I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing next, but. Yeah, definitely traded one addiction for another.
So I'm curious about that, because, you know, normally repeated hand movements lead to problems with your hands. Do you experience that, like carpal tunnel and all kinds of stiffness and all around that? Or not?
Some, not any more than computer work has done to me for 20 years. I have those copper compression gloves, which added to my readers and my stand. My husband probably is like, boy, I'm a lucky guy. But yeah, so I'll use like the copper compression gloves, but, and then there's one tool over there. They're little discs of plastic and they're hard plastic, but they're sticky on the back. So from the repetitive pushing the needle through, I get like calluses on my fingers. So you can put the sticky tab right onto your finger. And then I found it was slippery. So I use the, like the gauze tape, which is kind of spongy around that. For the larger projects, like when I'm doing the binding stitch, you're really pushing through the canvas and, you know, I've poked the back end of a needle into my skin just from pushing hard. And so that'll get a little worn and you just wrap your fingers and again, look totally ridiculous, but yeah. Yeah, well, and that's the thing. Every once in a while, like my husband will be in the room because I just stitch right in the living room. I have this really cute sewing table I found online and that's where I do it. And every once in a while I'll go, oh, do you need a Band-Aid? Oh, I'm good. I keep them in my table. So yeah, but just don't bleed on the canvas.
One or two questions while you're thinking about what that is, and then make a comment. I just want to say that, you know, I think it's really interesting to see so many of these iconic Northern Michigan scenes that of course we see time is coming on. But what I really appreciate in your work is that because of, I think that translation and medium, of course, but the time that it takes to render them, you're creating such a precious little object that it really transcends and becomes something different. I really like how it serves as that archive, your choice to render that lighthouse before it is changed.
Yeah.
And there's something very precious about it, but in a sincere way that I really love. So
Yeah.
thanks for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So any final questions for Steve? All right, thank you. Okay.
Cool. Thank you.